My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm speaking with Douglas Robbins. He is an author, playwright, and podcast host. Douglas began his writing career at a young age when one of his teachers asked the class to write a poem. Well, he got the writing bug, and he grew up, attended college, and held jobs in numerous fields from construction to insurance. The jobs changed, but his need to write and express himself remained a constant. He released his first novel, The Reluctant Human, in 2012. He quickly followed it up with the novella Max Johnny and a book of short stories titled Leaves Piled High. In 2019, he released Narican, The Cloaked Deception. This was his first book in a spiritual sci-fi series about the evolution of souls. He is currently working on the second and third books in the Narican series. And I'm sorry, am I saying that right?
Narican.
Narican. Another one of his books is Love in a Dying Town, which came out in 2021. It's the story of a single father struggling to raise his daughter in a dying factory town. It's a story about love, commitment, and sacrifice. Douglas recently wrote a play for the local community theater called Someone Anonymous, about people feeling anonymous in their lives, but knowing there's more to them waiting to get out. And like I said, he's a podcast host. He hosts the Den of Discussion, a show that illuminates everyday heroes who are making a difference in our world. So, Doug, thank you so much for coming on and agreeing to have this conversation with me, and sharing your story with the audience. I'm intrigued. Somebody that can write so many different books and just has this passion that you do. Well, first off, it's just awesome to talk to somebody that's passionate about something. When that passion comes out. So thank you for coming on.
Well, Dave, it's a pleasure being here, man. I'm excited to talk to you today. But it's funny. When I was a child, I was not much of a school student. I really didn't want anything to do with it. I felt like somebody was trying to pull the wool over my eyes as far as certain things I was supposed to learn. And even at that age, I kind of knew it was this homogenization of thought, of intellect, that we're all supposed to believe the same things and want the same things. But there was something inherent within me. I don't know where it came from, some other world, I don't know, some other life, that kind of saw through that. And I didn't know how to express that. My parents were good people, but kind of neglectful and not encouraging in that way. And I felt like as a child was really rejected a lot. And then I ended up parenting myself and ended up in some bad places because of that. But there was always that idea to express that information that needed to come out. And I would love to tell people, oh, I was a huge reader when I was a child and I read 15 books a week. And no, I wasn't. I loved being outside. I loved being in nature and playing and just sort of being in that natural world. And that was sort of more of the church for me, if you will, or the place really to grow, because school and all these institutions we were supposed to be indoctrinated into are all man-made. But nature, we are from. Humanity is from nature. And so I always felt the best there. There's no judgment in nature. There's acceptance in nature. That's where growth is. So even as a child, I had this information in me, and it was all about expression. It was never about writing per se. It was just ideas that were sort of lingering around my psyche. And it took a long time to understand that this is something I needed to get out. So when that teacher asked us to write a poem, just a silly little poem, I remember writing the opening lines. It was something like, religion is the lifelong betrayal. All you do is put a lot of money in the mail, or something like that. Just this silly thing. But, my father liked it, and he never cared about any of that stuff I had done. And the teacher even liked that. He got a kick out of it. So I was like, there's something to this. There's a power in this. And I've heard of other people. I remember Neil Peart, the drummer of Rush, had always said something similar, that he never felt that he was anyone in life. But when he was behind that drum kit, that's where his power was. That's where his strength was. And I felt something similar in words that was starting to percolate in my life.
Since we're talking about your childhood, where were you born and raised?
Just outside of New York City. So it was a town called New Rochelle, sort of a suburb, but large. It's probably 80,000, people lived there at the time, and just connected to all these other suburbs. And it was a very different time than now. Back then, schools were really just production lines, the big classes, 35 kids in a class, fights and whatever. So it wasn't about honing the individual or something along those lines. It was simply get them in, get them out. I remember the junior high, what they used to refer to as junior high, was basically like a prison. I mean, it had like bars on the window, and, like just not a good, you didn't feel like, ooh, I'm growing here. There's no like, hey, get to class, shut up and get to class.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I grew up, and started going to bars when I was a kid, and just, was wayward in every which way, but, kind of rejected society and all that. And I was going to bars when I was 14 years old, and a couple blocks from the house. And it was a weird time. I think the parents had learned maybe hands off, because their generation or their parents were from the Depression. So it was so restrictive probably. And the opposite happened. And there probably should have been a little more boundaries, a few more boundaries.
What did your mom and dad do for work?
Yeah, they were both educated. I mean, my father almost had his PhD in history or public administration, and then stopped it for whatever reason. He worked at Queens College for a number of years as a VP. My mother actually had a master's degree in speech pathology from both, I think, went to NYU. I mean, both educated. She even worked with JFK's father, Joe Kennedy, when he had a stroke. So I learned this later, like she had lived with them for several months, and he was supposedly a real bastard as far as, patting women on the behinds, and happened to her as well. But so they were both very educated. And then she had a business later on, but she loved singing and theater, and probably gave that up for us. I don't know how deep that regret ran, but she had died when she was 53. But so they were educated, but I'm not sure where the parenting skills were. But, like with anything, you bring your baggage with you bring your shortcomings with you. And that's how you live in the world,
You have siblings?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I have an older sister.
So you're the baby?
Something like that.
So I bet you she got all the strictness, huh?
She got more. And I wonder, and I've had this conversation with her, she also thinks because she was a girl or female, that they kind of paid more attention to her growth in some way, like, oh, the boy will take care of himself. It's a man's world kind of thing. But yeah, she is the opposite of me in a way. Like when I was a child, I was very shy, very quiet, and would just sort of like sit in the corner, like, hey, I'm over here kind of thing. If you want to pay attention to me over here. And she was the loud one. demanding and obstinate and in your face. And my father even named her Mouth because she was so loud about everything.
That's awesome. What did you go to school for when you graduated high school? You got your degree. What did you go to school for, and where did you go?
That's a loaded question, Dave. You don't know that it's loaded, but it's loaded. So, I finished high school. I had never done well until about 11th grade. And then I was like, should probably do a little better here. And then 12th, because I really was kind of politics in some ways. You got to play the game. And so 12th grade, I did fine. And I applied to a school in Maine, just only 2 or 3 schools. I got into this one school, like kind of remote school in very deep Maine. And ran into some trouble there. I won't get into that now. But then my mother died. So she died like within that year or so. So I was kind of lost, and my parents were supposed to move to Florida because she had been very ill for a number of years. She had breast cancer, had the wig and going chemo and all those horrible things. So she had died, and then she died just a few weeks before my parents were supposed to move to Florida. So I ended up moving to Florida with my father. And then I just kind of needed to go, and I started really becoming nomadic in many ways. And I went out to Washington State, went to school there for a little bit. I met a girl. We moved to Colorado. I went up to Michigan, Florida, like all over the place. I ended up going to, I think, this might be a record, 7 colleges in 10 years. Because I wasn't really trying to graduate.
Yeah.
I was really just taking some classes, and typically it was like a history or English base, but it's really just, I'd go to, say, Eastern Michigan University, take some writing classes. I go to, somewhere else and so it was never like, ooh, let me finish my degree. It was just, hey, I should probably take some classes. And I think somewhere along the lines, I was like, yeah, you're a moron. You should probably get a degree here since you've been doing all this. So I eventually went to SUNY Albany in New York and got my degree from there. But it was a long and winding road to get there.
Nice. Well, you peaked.
My parents were not impressed, by the way.
Well, you mentioned that you got into a little bit of trouble in Maine. I got to hear this story, man. if you're willing to share.
No, I'm happy to. It's actually a book I've 90% done. It's called Enter the Fire. And it's when you're kind of indoctrinated into the world, if you will. So I went there. I was a wise ass from New York, sarcastic to the hilt, and had long hair, rock and roller. And went to this place, and I didn't know much about it. I just thought it's Maine. It's cool. It's remote. It's mountains and water and all that. It was a very remote place. Only about 1,200 students went there. And Maine at that time had something like 1 million people in the whole state. So very, very small. I come from a much larger area. The Bronx alone has millions of people compared to Maine, the whole state. So very different culturally. Very conservative area. And I happened to meet up with some other guys. One other dude was a long hair. He was even more of a wise ass than I was. I at least had some common sense about it. When to keep my mouth shut. He did not. If you pushed him against the wall, you're gonna lose the battle, the verbal battle. And then we had a couple other guys. So we were all out of staters. And the entire security and fraternity was all run by one fraternity. So all of the Greek life or whatever, the RDs, the RAs, the security all came from one fraternity. And one guy was like a cop from another city. Another guy was an ex-IRA member from Ireland. All kind of white bread guys. And my RA was just a doughy white guy who he was just a puppy dog to anyone in charge, So no drinking on campus. We were all underage, but we were smarter than them, or thought we were. And so eventually, like, they had checked our bags a couple times, never found anything because we'd finished it and discarded it elsewhere. But one night we go up and we're going to our rooms, or to this one dude's room. So there was 4 of us, and the 2 RDs and the RA were at the other end of the floor. And the one RD and this guy, Jeff, did not like each other. And so the RDs come over, and of course they're questioning us and all this. And the RD said something to Jeff, and he said, well, some stupid thing like, well, you smell funny, or whatever it is. I don't even remember, some childish thing. And so that RD says, this is the cop from the other city. He says, well, we'll see where you're living tomorrow. And we're like, yeah, whatever. Like, we thought it was just a joke because once again, Jeff had outsmarted him. So now the next day, the 4 of us, now this is just a few weeks until the end of the semester. So we all get letters hand delivered to us from the dean of residential life, or whatever it is. The dean of residential life is a born-again Christian, 20-year military man who was new at the school. So he wanted to make a name for himself. So we were all called in to the residential life building, and the dean and I had read up that night on the conduct code book and the residential life agreement. So I knew a little bit about it. So we go into this building, and the 4 of us in the lobby, and we're called in individually. So I was brought back first. I said, let me go, because at least I've read this thing a little bit. So I go in there, and the dean is in there with the 2 RDs. And obviously it's like a setup, right? So the dean, says, well, I've been talking to these fine gentlemen about what happened, last night. Tell me what happened. So I tell him, and he literally starts laughing. Why should I believe you when I have these 2 upstanding gentlemen just told me a different story altogether? And so he says, I want you moving out in 24 hours or whatever it is. And I'm like, in shock, right? We all have tests in the next week or 2. I mean, it's like, that's not even enough time to find a place, could care less about us, basically. Wanted us out. So I was furious, probably cursing, and I eventually said, well, we're going to appeal this. And so long story short, the other guys also got the same issue. The 2 guys, Tim and Dave, who were just like sweet kids from Rhode Island who had never done a thing wrong in their life, they're kind of wrapped up in this. They're freaking out. Their parents are going to kill them, So I had to make a decision. Do I fight this on principle and say we're being wronged here, there's injustice that needs to be addressed, or do I just eat it and study and find a place? And my parents, or my mother was still alive. My father, I called him, he basically hung up on me, like, what the hell did you do this time? And I had to make this decision, like, well, what do I do? We're kind of up against it. And I said, honestly, the principle is way more important than the grades. I didn't know where it was going to go. So me and this one guy who had absolutely nothing to do with it, but he had like a 0.42 GPA, didn't really care. He became my unofficial attorney, on campus. And we just started raising hell. We went to the president's house, spoke to the president's wife, the VP of academic affairs. We just started talking to everybody we could and saying, look, we're appealing this. And the president even was kind enough to meet us. If I'm taking too long, I could probably shorten it. It's just such a kooky story. The president was like, yeah, I mean, the dean said, you got to move out, you got to move out. And I'm like, what would you do if we didn't move out? And he took that as like a challenge. I think I'd have to call the cops and have you removed. I was like, oh, good to know. Anyway, so all this craziness, I think it bought us a few days though, because the president's like, let me talk to him and see what's going on. So it bought us like 72 hours or something. And so, like I said, we started just raising a ruckus with advisors and teachers and anybody that would listen, anyone that would lend us an ear. And the VP of Academic Affairs had been there for like 20 years, very sweet man. And we told him our story. And he said, I expected you guys to come off as, kind of incompetent or imbeciles, and you're very articulate. So I don't know the dean. He's new here, but let me look into it a little bit. So, okay, so now we get letters back from the dean saying who's going to be on the appeal committee. Nothing but people from this fraternity. 2 teachers and 1 advisor, all connected to this fraternity. And so I wrote back and I said, no, that's a biased, a committee. And I said no to him, and I brought this to the president, and I brought this to the VP of Academic Affairs. And they're like, oh, that's curious. And so time goes by, and there's some other nonsense that the dean tried to play, and of how bad and dangerous and disruptive we were, even though we'd never gotten written up. Maybe Jeff had gotten written up once for alcohol or something, but nothing else. And I did a survey on my place, and the dean submitted something during this appeal that was clearly written by one person, because we were like, Dave, myself, and I, those kind of things. Like, oh, there's a lot of glaring issues. Nobody's going to write it like that. Anyway, so we go back and forth. I just basically abandoned class and just, this is all that matters to me. And so we go to the appeal committee. We have our little debates, and the appeal committee, hears us out. So it was not the appeal committee that the dean wanted. Actually, the VP of Academic Affairs became the appeal committee chair. Long story short, several days go by. Now it's like, finals week. And, I think I made it to 1 final or something. And we won unanimously. The dean loses it. He gets up and slams it on the table and starts screaming at the VP of Academic Affairs, who'd been there for 20 years. Says, I'm not going to accept these boys. They're trouble, blah, blah, blah. So the VP, who's this sweet guy, said, Peter, outside now, like raising his voice. So there you can hear them screaming in the hall. And they said, we're going to the president. Good. I spoke to him this morning. Let's go. The director of residential life said, boys, I wish you luck. I'm washing my hands of this. I want nothing to do with this. So it's just a crazy thing. We were reinstated for everything. But, by then, we had kind of had to move out before the cops came and everything. And it's funny because I went to speak with the president before I left. And he said, because of you, we had to rewrite the conduct code book because the dean did not have the authority to remove us from the dorms unless of campus emergency. And obviously that was not a campus emergency. So that's actually the somewhat condensed version. I apologize if it took too long, but this is something, I know you talk a lot about in your shows, leadership. Now, what were they trying to lead? What were they trying to attempt? Right? They were subjugating justice. They had their own agendas because their little bruised egos got hurt, and they wanted to make an example of us. Right? Well, if we had rolled over, they would have, and they would have been galvanized to do it, and they weren't. And I spoke to the president, and I really should have, president, and I failed half the classes, or 80%, and I should have said, look, dude, like, give us our money back or give us better grades or something. But I didn't have the smarts to do that. But it's one of those times in life where you have to make a decision of what is most important here. And my soul was most important.
So you leave Maine.
Yeah.
You move to Florida. I imagine you started doing construction or something. You did a bunch of stuff.
Well, I went to Florida. So my mother died. I went back to New York. My mother died. And then, a couple months later, we went to Florida, went back to community college, or started a community college. And just, I had been a valet parker for a few years, which was always a great gig, easy money, and you get to drive cars. And so I think at that point, I was just doing that and trying to figure it out. My mother had just died. And, my father was old school, and he, got to bear the burden. So we never knew how sick she was. I mean, I knew she had cancer, but I didn't know how sick she was. So she actually only had a few months to live that last time she went to the doctor. Well, because my father never told us this, we never knew that. So that was a bit of an issue, because he really took time away from us, and really put a little bit of a wedge between us, because again, he might not have known any better, but you got to think it out a little bit. But so yeah, moved to Florida, and then I went, after a few months, went to Washington State, which is incredible out there. You've been out there, but
No, that's actually the Pacific Northwest.
yes.
The furthest north over on the West Coast I've been is like Northern California,
Mhm.
and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
So I would imagine Washington State has got,
Well, the state's gorgeous, the Cascade Mountains, but it also has the San Juan Islands off, and it's probably the best kept secret in the country. Hundreds and hundreds, archipelagos, stunning. You take ferries all over to all these islands. Some don't have any cars, etc., allowed on the islands. Some are just remote, but there are whales going through there, eagles flying overhead. I mean, the East Coast has been around for 400 plus years. Well, the West Coast has really only been around for 100, 150 years. So it's very different. It's not as built up as the East, and isn't as decrepit as some of the East as far as old industry dying. So it is a very special place out there. I would highly recommend it.
nice. Well, where at in Florida were you?
The Jupiter Tequesta area.
Oh yeah, man. I spent a lot of time in my youth in Jupiter.
Yeah.
I actually lived there for a while. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Great
beautiful.
beach. Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, after my mother, I found comfort at the beach. Talk about nature once again, and the embrace of nature. I found great comfort at the water, at the beach, with the open skies. Very peaceful there, and I would be there day and night, man. I would even sleep there sometimes at night. And again, it was just one of those places, almost like the bosom, almost like a mother's arms kind of thing. So that kind of helped me recover a bit.
At what point did you start writing your first book?
Well, another loaded question, Dave. And the reason why it's a loaded question is eventually, so after I finished college in SUNY Albany, in Albany, New York, I said, I'm going to move. I'd started writing more poems and some little things, and I'd started a novel called Dawn. And it was about two college kids in love, where the girl's mother is sick and dying of cancer. Sort of this family dynamic and tug of war. Like, how do you love someone when someone very close to you is sick and dying? How do you celebrate and be joyous, whereas one of your closest, people are dying? So I started writing this and had a couple hundred pages, moved to New York City. And I didn't know anything about writing, though. I didn't know about anything about the industry. I didn't have any connections. Something I had learned growing up is I did not know how to ask for help. I did not know how to adapt. And so I moved to the city, started, partying again, and sent this book out to a few agents, etc. And it didn't go anywhere. Sent out to 5 agents or something. I had no idea what they wanted or not. And again, didn't really know how to follow up or join things or take classes or anything. So the book basically died on the vine, even though I had all these things coming to me about it. I just didn't know how to step forward. I didn't know how to say, hey, wait a moment, don't give up. But I didn't have that muscle at that time. And so I did give up. I said, I don't know how to do it. Nobody's here to guide me. No one's here to say, hey, hold my hand, let me show you the way, kind of thing. And it breaks my heart to even admit it, because it's still a pain that I carry. But this beautiful story, fell by the wayside. And I was like, I don't want to hear it. I'm not a writer. I can't make it happen, And so I was in a very dark place for a number of years because of that, very dark place. Because, if you give up what you love and who you are, the part of you that you love, what are you left with? You're left with emptiness, and you're left with, okay, if this dream or this person I am isn't true, well, then you have a million choices. I could be a lawyer, I could be a foot doctor, I could, and they're all wrong, right? Because it isn't who you are. And so it took me a number of years for the writing to come back to me. And it was very dark initially. And that's probably what the reluctant human is sort of a purging. It's philosophical, but it's also similar to, it's that reluctant human. It's somewhat similar to the Someone Anonymous play, in that most people feel like there's someone more to them. There's something more to them. And they're living these roles and playing these roles. And I got this job and I got this thing and I got to pay the bills. And it's just these roles we insert into, right? But it's not our truth. It's just these things we got to do. And there's a line, I'm a big prog rock fan, so I like Jethro Tull a lot. And so they have a song that starts with skating away on the thin ice of the new day. And the opening lines are so profound. And it is that born to humanity, sold to society. Because that's really what happens, is humanity is this broad, expanding thing, the spirit, whatever you want to call. And then you're sold into these ideas and ideologies of institutions of I have to be this and want this, and of things you now get smaller to adhere to. Jobs aren't asking for who's your true self? Who are you really? Jobs don't care about that. They can do the job. Shut up and do the job. That's what they hired you for. Great. So anyway, the reluctant human was really about that part of us that maybe we shun sometimes because it's so broad and powerful. We don't always know how to honor it. And so that's kind of the main character, is that guy, because he's made some mistakes. So it's about regrets and how do you heal from them and how do you overcome them and get back on track to a life of purpose, if you will. So that's kind of how I started getting back to writing. If you lose something, it comes back to you, it's yours. I think that's how writing kind of found me again.
You started talking about self and purpose. I was just working on something. I was gonna share it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I mention in my book is the oracle at Delphi. In the temple there's all these pillars, columns, and engraved on, I believe there's 68 maxims that are attributed to the oracle at Delphi. The number one maxim that is engraved at the top of the main, I don't know what the entryway is called, but it's going into the temple. The most prominent column at the top of that is engraved, "Know thyself."
Mm.
And you find it in some form in a lot of philosophies, how important it
Yeah.
is to know yourself,
Yeah.
who you are. And so I talk a little bit about it in my book. And I just had a conversation with somebody where we were talking about Buddhism and Taoism, and I had pulled out my copy of the Tao Te Ching,
Mhm.
and I don't know what they're called in this verse or some, I don't know.
Yeah.
But 33 is, "One who knows others is clever, but one who knows himself is enlightened." And, I know it's something simple, but I talk about it quite a bit because when I left the fire service, spent 23 years working in the fire department. And when I left, I wasn't ready to leave, but it was time for me to go. I experienced this identity crisis because
Yeah.
for the bulk of my adult life, that's how I identified. When
Mhm.
people asked, like when you get introduced to somebody, "Yeah, I'm Dave." And they're like, "Oh, what do you do, Dave?" And, talk
Right.
about the fire department.
Right.
That's my identity.
Yeah.
Well, when I left the fire service, that's no longer my identity.
Right.
Like it, and so I had to dig pretty deep. And I want to say that there, well, shit, man, still to this day, there are days where I'm like, man, who the fuck am I?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
and I've interviewed monks. I've Buddhist monks, and um, individuals that have done retreats and stayed in monasteries and like really dove deep. And the idea is to really be able to know who you are at the core, like what
Yeah.
is your purpose, all
Yeah.
this. So
Yeah.
I said all of that to ask you this. I feel like through your writing, you've kind of had this, existential experience
Yeah.
where you're digging into who you are and what does this mean? What does that mean? Who am I? That kind of thing. Have you come to any conclusions?
Yes, I have the meaningful life, meaningful right over here. Meaning of life. Oh, can't share it with you. Well, I was curious because I used to be monkish. Like I would really isolate myself in the woods and little places and not have much of a social life, and do martial arts for hours and hours a day, and just kind of have some basic means, making a few bucks, and studying Zen and Buddhism and Taoism. Um, so I understand that life, that monastic in a sense life, to a point, that austere life. I never was a monk, but there are so many pieces to us, and it's very confusing at times because we have this broader self that's like, yes, you can do all this in this world, this like purity, right? When you think of the future, there's just purity, there's no obstacles. Yes, you can accomplish all these things, but the future is filled with emotions and other things and other people and other things happening and unpredictable things. So you have this sort of broader self, and then you have that sometimes smaller self that maybe was injured and not so confident, and I don't know how to do that, and I'm scared over here, and I'm supposed to be a strong, tough guy, but I'm unsure, I'm undeveloped over here. So I don't think there's one piece to us. You have the line of, the spiritual life and the physical body or whatever. And that spiritual life is trying to be fulfilled, but you have emotions in the physical body. And that's what keeps you trapped quite often. It's that sense of self, of the limiting beliefs, of the struggles of, I'm not good enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not connected, or I can't get there, or whatever it is, I've been hurt, whatever it might be. And we make mistakes. We all make choices often based upon those emotional reactions we have. And so something I come back to is, we're often talking about IQ. Well, the IQ is very smart, or this person very smart. And that's what we kind of hone in school, right? Intellect and regurgitation and critical thinking, hopefully not as critical as it should be. But really just information, right? It's an information-based education system. However, it is the EQ, the emotional quotient, that really guides your life and guides on how the decisions you make. When you're in a situation that's unpredictable, it's those emotions are going to say, pull back, run, fight or flight, or I know how to handle this because I'm resilient and I'm strong and confident, So you have these different facets of who we are. And that's really the challenge, when we often feel like I should be over there, but I'm over here. Well, how do you resolve that, right? It's not easy, because now you're talking about, you have energy that's just saying I should be over there. That's flowing energy. That's purity, spirit, imagination, whatever you want to call it. But then you have the physical of, yeah, I really like to buy a truck or go on a trip or whatever. I'd like to get out of this job. Yeah, but I need to pay the bills. And so it's sort of a conflict, right? Of within ourselves, there are conflict or contrarian ideas. Our consciousness, you have the consciousness of who we are, the sense of self, what we're here to accomplish, that purposeful drive of what do we want to do here. But then you have that emotional baggage of choices, regrets, things that maybe you haven't developed or dealt with. A lot of people are on autopilot. They're not dealing with their shit. They're not dealing with these sort of unexamined triggers that sets them off, that they just, if you look at everyone's angry about everything right now, right? Because social media feeds off of that. That's what news feeds off of. They don't care so much about the actual facts, a lot of things. They're feeding off of your fears and divisiveness and your story that you want in the world. Guns or not guns or whatever it might be. And conspiracies or whatever it is. And so it's very hard to reconcile, because we aren't monks. I've seen things about monks that they're the happiest people on the planet. Well, they're the happiest people on the planet because they're not dealing with constant stress, of the world, of the news, of the bills, of kids yelling things at, the more you put on the plate, the more stress you're going to have. And then, my goodness, you look at social media and the news, and it's easy to feel powerless. It's easy to feel small and insignificant and powerless. And that's why we often have to step back from these things, because they're not feeding our best selves. They're not feeding our souls, our spirits. They're not healing us emotionally. And so, we often hear what we put into our bodies, right? You got to eat good. You are what you eat. Well, you also are what you think. You also are what you intake. So if we're reading a lot of crap and how this side is bad and that side is bad and blah, 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 well, that doesn't help you. It just feeds your anger. It feeds your emotions. It doesn't feed love. It doesn't feed a broadness. It doesn't feed, embrace. It feeds the disease within you, because this is now what pits people against each other. It's okay. You can want guns or you can not want guns, but use your intellect, use critical thinking, try to understand the subjects a little deeper than just, Oh, you want to take my guns away? Or you don't want to take my gun, it's easy to kind of jump on this bandwagon. I interviewed a gentleman the other day, and he's saying the problem with people is they suffer from the same thing they suffered 200,000 years ago, and that is group thinking. It's very easy to just get lumped in. Okay, everyone is group thinking. We have my sister-in-law is here with her 2 dogs. The one dog, they just jump all over everything. My dog doesn't jump on anything, doesn't typically bark. Her dog barks constantly. Well, the last few days, our dog has been barking a lot more. Every time the other dog barks, he starts barking. He wants to jump on the couch like the other dogs. No, get off the couch. And so it's very easy because it's harder to think. It's easier to just say, yeah, you're right. I take whatever crap you tell me, and I think exactly the same. And that's kind of where we started this. You asked me, about, when I grew up, and I said at that time, that's what was being fed. Everyone's supposed to think the same and want the same. And when you become that individual, when you honor who you truly are, you are willing to step out from that group and say, hey, I disagree. And this is why I disagree. And I still respect you. And, like, you can do you, you do me, I'll do me. But that's the challenge, is saying, hey, I'm going to be me. Because we ultimately should have billions and billions of individuals. Now, we all have similar needs, wants, etc. We are all interconnected in this global life. That could be a whole nother topic, but it's really just about being an individual and honoring yourself. And that's where you grow. That's where you stand tallest. That's when you say, I'm living my best self. It's not because Betsy down the street approves of me. And that's the hardest thing for us, is judgment. We take judgment from parents, from associates, from coworkers, from friends, family, everybody else. And then we add to and go, yeah, I'm not good enough because that's what that person said. But none of this is truth. And so these are the things we have to keep digging out, sometimes with a jackhammer, sometimes with a shovel. But, giving ourselves the space, giving ourselves the love, and say, hey, I want to feel better there. I have all this pain in this area. Something happens and it triggers me, and you feel horrible. The person over there that triggered it doesn't feel horrible. You feel horrible because you're carrying all this crap. Well, that's crap you have to unpack and heal, because you don't want to carry it the rest of your life. And I think the less, or the more we unpack, the truer we get to our essences, the lighter we become, and the more fulfilled we get to live this life.
Writing is such a powerful tool in so many different ways, isn't it?
Yeah, because words, what do you got, man? You have words. What did Martin Luther King Jr. have? Words and deeds. And, if I may go on another tangent for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you have the issue with Ukraine right now. Very serious issue. You have Putin bombing a sovereign nation because he wants to take it back, like he did with Georgia and other places. Well, Zelensky has stepped up and he's become the global symbol. But what he has done is shown people the best of what they can be. And he has shown America who the hell we claim to be. And to me, it's like, you cannot let him fall. You cannot let his family fall, and you cannot let Ukraine fall. Because if you fast forward 5 years, 10 years, what's going to happen then? Putin's going to have more power. Oh, he's got nuclear bombs. Well, he'll always have that. He's the bully with the big stick. Well, we have big sticks too. A lot of people do. I'm not saying anybody should be using nuclear weapons. What I'm saying is you cannot allow tyranny to spread. If our convictions are our convictions, they are meaningless without deeds.
Amen. Man. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. Pretty freaking cool, man. I really wasn't sure where the conversation was gonna go, and but yeah, man, really cool. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your story and your wisdom. Really appreciate it, man.
Dave, it's a pleasure, man. And this, I feel like people look to leaders to get back to it, to change the world, to politicians and whomever, Elon Musk, whatever it is. But that's typically not how the world changes. The world changes by you and me and other people saying, hey, let's shine a light on this and do something about it. So it always starts with grassroots, by people saying, hey, no, we deserve better and we're going to demand better and take actions to be better. So such a pleasure speaking with you in this forum, man.
Yeah, likewise. Likewise. Now, for those listening that would like to connect with you, follow you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Always a good question. Thank you. So my website is douglasrobinsauthor.com. If you sign up with your little email, you get a free story, but it has my podcast. It has the books. It has, kind of what I'm all about. I'm always about the human condition, moving forward, living sort of a just life. And that's really what a lot of the characters are that I write about. You can also follow me. Probably easiest is Facebook, douglasrobinsauthor.com. I'm on Amazon, but yeah, I mean, wherever they can find me, I'm on Twitter, but I'm on these things, but I don't really do much with them half the time. Twitter, Douglas Robbins 4, maybe. I'm on Instagram under the Den of Discussion. But if you get onto the website and sign up, then you get my updates and emails and podcasts and all that stuff. So
Nice.
And who doesn't want free stories, Dave?
Yeah, everybody.
Everyone wants free stuff.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you so much. I'll have a link to your website in the show notes, and so everybody listening that wants to check you out, they can just click on the link. So
thank you, my friend. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir. Likewise.
Be well.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.